Welcome to the show today. Today I have Gina Domanig on the show, who is the managing partner of Emerald Technology Ventures. Very excited to dive into your story. So let's start right there. So tell us a bit more. Who is Gina, and what's the story, Gina, that got you to where we are today?
Well, the story probably starts in Chicago. So I'm originally from Chicago. After graduate school, went to work for Swiss Bank Corporation in Chicago. Got transferred to New York, met my husband, moved to Switzerland, and I spent about 10 years working at Sulzer, head of strategy and M&A in the 90s, going through a massive restructuring. That was a lot of fun. Then afterwards, in 2000, I joined Sustainable Asset Management, actually a startup company itself, to build up the venture capital activities. And we sold Sustainable Asset Management to Robeco in 2006. And we did a management buyout, rebranded, and that was the birth of Emerald Technology Ventures.
Love how you're able to put all this wealth and wisdom into just one nutshell in like 30 seconds or so. So I want to dive a little bit more into those pieces. And one overarching piece that I'd love to know more about is in general. So what is it that inspires you every day to go to work?
Well, I have the pleasure of working with startup companies and innovation, and every single day it's something new. It's a fantastic job. It's like you're being paid to be at school, right? You just learn every single day. When we have these entrepreneurs or the founder teams coming in, their one goal is just to cram as much information into my brain as possible, right? So that's a lot of fun, right? That's excitement. There's another side of startup life, obviously, which is the difficulties that they go through. But we really can help them and struggle together with them and save them or help to save them. So that you have a feeling of responsibility. You invest in a company, you don't just walk away when the going gets tough. We know in absolutely every single one of these companies, it will get tough, right? So that's exciting. I mean, you wouldn't just drop your startup companies, your little babies, if you like, alongside of the road when the going gets tough. And that sense of urgency and the sense of purpose is really what gives you no other choice when you get out of bed.
I love that. Now, about entrepreneurship or startups in general, what is it that, always you make that conscious decision to work with that market, right? So what is it about entrepreneurs? What is it about founders and startups that fascinates or excites you?
I think the startup from the company point of view, right? They're coming up with something new. In our sector, which originally we started under the title sustainability, then it morphed to clean tech. I think today I would rather use the term industrial technology innovation. But they're trying to better a certain industry, typically industries that have existed for decades, if not centuries. And you can really feel the improvement that they want to make, right? So I believe in the underlying purpose of these companies. But the entrepreneurs themselves, and this is, I have to say, a double-edged sword. They are so convinced, they're so determined, they're so dynamic. It can be a little bit, detached from reality sometimes, but that optimism is contagious, right? You have to always kind of, bring yourself back down and say, okay, it's probably going to take 10 times as long, cost 10 times as much money. But they need to have that because the odds are against them, right? So if entrepreneurs weren't, let's say, overly optimistic, we wouldn't have startup companies. So yeah, I think that's quite exciting to be involved in that industry. And it's something that it's not just from the pace that's exciting, it's also from the goal at the end of the day to make a substantial improvement. So I think that's very motivating for them and for us.
I love that. Bringing that purpose, that passion, that energy, excitement, optimism into the business world. I think we need a lot more of that. So I love that you are, a part of this and just this support or empowerment, enablement engine, basically, who supports those entrepreneurs. So I love that. Now, I want to dive a little bit more into you as an entrepreneur. Because you started Emerald, when was it? Was it 10 or 17 years ago?
It was about almost 20 years ago, yeah.
Almost 20 years ago.
was the beginning of 2000, but within sustainable asset management. So
Wow,
it was a very
2000?
small company. Yeah.
2000 is already 17 years ago. Like, how crazy is that? Wow. Okay. So, I want to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. So you've built this organization together with your partners. Now you've built it into a fairly large fund over those, 17 years. Along the way of those 17 years, building this, being the entrepreneur, being at the head of the organization, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced along the way?
Obviously there's a challenge of investing in this space, right? Which is the technology adoption cycles are horribly slow. So that's always been, it's a reality of the industry. It's difficult to deal with it. Some industries will move a little bit faster than others. But probably as a firm, the difficult things were, I think, when we started in 2000, it is a long time ago. We were the first institutional fund in this space. There was like nobody to co-invest with, right? Even if we would find a fantastic company, we needed co-investors because we need to bring together a lot more money than what we could invest. And so in the early years, it was kind of this building an ecosystem. It was a challenge, but it was creating something. And then if you remember back in 2005, 2006, it became just an absolute hype. Ridiculous amounts of money came into the sector. All kinds of people were investing, making really kind of odd decisions about putting substantial amounts of money into companies that, from an industrial technology point of view, you really kind of wonder how they're going to get their money out, much less make a return on it. But then the financial crisis kind of wiped all that away. All the kind of, let's say, people who were just joining the bandwagon, they immediately left, which caused a huge problem for the underlying companies, right? Because all of a sudden a company had let's say, good, strong investor group of 4 or 5 investors who everyone would expect them to continue to finance those companies. But then they decide overnight, no, we're out of the sector. We're out of venture capital, or we're overexposed. We need to get out of clean tech, and we need to go back into doing our consumer IT. So these companies really, really struggled, and that was very difficult for us to try to save these companies. But also, in some cases, it just wasn't possible. We couldn't pick up the slack for everybody who was leaving. So that was definitely the most difficult part. And that, it's interesting because the financial crisis happened a long time ago, but in venture capital, you still feel the effects today, right? Because we invest in some of these companies for a very long time. So we still have portfolio companies that we were invested in at the time of the financial crisis, right? So they're still trying to recover out of the damage, the long-term damage that was done. But now I think, as an industry where it's much healthier, the people who are in this industry are people who are in there for a strategic reason, are very committed. There's a lot more corporates. So corporate venture capital has just exploded after the last few years. And so I think it's much more healthy new reality, much more stable. And I think today, when we bring together syndicates, we can have a pretty good feeling that syndicate will stay together and support the company.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, because, it's today, it's almost like such a long time ago that we don't even think so much about the financial crisis, even though, maybe some argue it never went away, and things like that. But it's really interesting to see that space as well, because venture capital in Switzerland still to that day is sort of like a unicorn, because yes, there's private investors, there's institutional investors, but private venture capital as a thing, it's like, okay, that's Silicon Valley, that's over there, right? It's not something really in Switzerland. And to me, it's astonishing. Like, when I got to know you and you told me like 17 years ago you started the venture capital, I was like, well, like 17 years ago, nothing existed. Today, almost nothing exists in the market in Switzerland from a venture capital perspective. So it's really interesting to see how you've built this up and sort of like built up not only a company, but also a market that
Yeah.
you took with you. It's really interesting there. So on a lessons perspective, if you could, over the past 17 years, if you could just pick three key lessons that made all the difference for you to have learned, what would they be?
Definitely, it's the team that's here together with me. That is just absolutely key. I've got, most of the guys in the team, we've worked together for over 10 years. The stability with vis-a-vis our investors, vis-a-vis the portfolio companies, you learn so many lessons in venture capital. A lot of them you don't learn, sometimes you don't learn a lesson until you're trying to get out of a company, and then you think, 10 years ago, we should have structured this completely differently, right? So these are very long-term lesson learning periods, if you like. So that is absolutely, for me, very, very important that we have, the importance of not just the founder teams, but this team here, the investing team. Everybody knows that in these entrepreneurs, the people are what matter, the people what matter. In industrial technology, the technology also matters, right? So, but it's that combination. So, and I think that, we kind of go back and forth as an industry over the years as far as, do you stick behind a founder? Are there different horses for different courses? Do you pull them out of the CEO role and put them into another role? Do you bring in a hired hand? Will they fight as much? So I think that that's a big lesson learned as far as the organizational development long term. I'm talking long term, let's say 3-5 years, right? When we get in, that is definitely another big lesson learned, is get consensus, alignment with the co-investors, but especially with the management team as far as what the organizational development will be. And then the third one is something that we've been very lucky to be able to build up over the years, are these really strong relationships with the large corporations. Because in industrial technology, typically these startups need to sell to, or at least through, large incumbents, right? So having investors, co-investors in a portfolio company who can bring those kinds of relationships to the table is incredibly powerful. Even if they can't put in a whole lot of money, I might take somebody into a syndicate with €1 million, but we know that they have contacts to a very strong market segment that's going to help pull the technology. So anything that will help accelerate technology adoption. So I would say those are probably my three.
They're pretty big, that's for sure. Yeah, and they apply to pretty much every company and every industry, and that's what I love about lessons like that, because they're completely transferable and adjustable to each individual organization, industry sector, and things like that. So I want to move a little bit into the present right now. So right now, today, what are the things that you're working on that excite you the most? What are some of the most exciting things right now?
Well, obviously I've got my portfolio companies that I focus on. A lot of them are industrial IT, right? So, we've been investing in the energy space, in transportation, in water, in chemicals industry for almost 20 years now. But a lot of the new innovations have kind of the digitalization of these processes and whatnot. So, for example, one of my portfolio companies does high definition maps for autonomous driving, right? So I spent a lot of time, obviously it's a super dynamic sector. It's a lot of fun to work in that. There's a lot of strategic options that are alternatives we need to work through. So that's exciting. Working on another one of my portfolio companies in Israel does network monitoring of water networks. So that's exciting. That finally, that space is really starting to pick up. I think the water utilities are getting to be much more open to innovation. And one company that we're looking at right now, we're most likely going to invest in, does data analytics for chemical processes. So you see that, if you think that almost 20 years ago we were investing in much more, power generation type of technologies, today it's a lot more about data analytics, algorithms that, improving optimization of planning of asset infrastructure and whatnot. So it's really exciting. I think it's right now, and I think for the next probably 5 years or so, the digitization of the industrial sectors is still going to be a major theme within our investing area.
So this is something I want to dive a little bit more into, which also already goes a bit into the future theme. I mean that, there's an industry or several industry, I call them heavy industries, like, they've been around for a long time. They have a lot of assets, physical assets. They're really heavy in terms of cost structures and everything. And now this digital wave is coming to them. It used to be, there's all these internet startups, like that's digital, right? And now suddenly digital is coming into 200-year-old companies that have this huge infrastructure and has the potential to completely change everything in an organization that already is a massive machine. So my question to you is, where do you see this trend going with, the digitalization in that industrial tech sector, in that heavy industry sector? What do you think the impact is going to be on that wave, on that digital wave, on an industry like that?
I think, well, first of all, I think it's really important that we don't disenfranchise the users, right? It's difficult if a company comes up with an innovation that says, I'm going to replace the plant engineer, right? It's probably going to be a difficult time getting that guy to sign on to this, right? So anything that makes their job, to improves their performance, ultimately, I think, particularly on the infrastructure side, and if you think about the huge amount of money that needs to be invested in, renovating infrastructure, whether it's the water infrastructure, the whole energy sector has a lot of infrastructure that needs to be renovated. I think that a lot of these innovations that we're seeing are going to reduce the end cost of doing that. So hopefully it'll allow an acceleration of a lot of infrastructure investments that need to be made. We're looking at some really interesting companies that are able to bring some of these infrastructure projects forward at much lower costs. So I think that's great. Water, I think that, as I said, now that the water utilities are getting a lot more open to innovation, I think we're going to see innovation in the water space that not just addresses the infrastructure, what I was talking about before, but also the cost, let's say the resource intensity, meaning primarily water and energy within the water space. I think that's going to be really exciting. So transportation is anyway fantastic. I mean, what's going on right now in the transportation sector, if you had asked me 10 years ago, would these companies be seriously considering, the fact that they may topple or they have to completely turn their business model on its head? They would have never thought it, right? But going all the way from shared mobility to, electric vehicles, and then you get into autonomous driving. There's so many parts of that entire value chain that are changing, and I wouldn't just say they're under threat, because that's too negative in my view. I think they have so many opportunities now, and it's a very complex ecosystem. And so it can't be that just one party tries to push, right? You need several parties, and that seems to be coming together, right? You've got the regulatory side, you've got the OEM side, you've got the consumer side. So you've got a lot of different players who are willing to break the way they used to do business, right? Change their habits, because that's very often a major stumbling block to technology adoption, right? So I think the transportation area is going to continue to be super fascinating.
One thing I also love about what you just said is, a lot of people are afraid of, oh my God, it's going to steal my job. It's going to, it's going to do that. It's going to do this. I mean, at the end of the day, I think looking at this as a threat is really just like, in the past, we've looked at so many revolutions as a threat. And then we come out and we go like, oh, it wasn't that bad. It's actually so much better now. And we've done this so many times as humanity. And every single time we have to do it again, we go like, oh my God, the world is gonna, go under. And every time it's the same thing again and again. So I really love that you looked at this more from a performance perspective and from an infrastructure perspective, because I think that's, I mean, at the end of the day, with those kinds of organizations, that is also where a lot of the costs are. I mean, predictive maintenance is one example, right? Where it's just like, oh my God, every 2 years we do a maintenance on the whole thing. What's the point in today's day and age, right? You have so many data points, so many analytics that you can actually do predictive maintenance, but there has to be technology behind it. There has to be, a lot of new things implemented into that whole infrastructure for this to work. So I love that. One more thing I want to dive into is this, the Swiss ecosystem. Like last time we talked, you said, well, most of our deals are, they're not in Switzerland, right? I mean, it's, there's a lot of US, obviously Israel there's so many startup nations now. And I have this conversation almost every week about Switzerland as a startup nation, entrepreneurship in Switzerland. So from your perspective, what do you think, where do we stand state of the art right now in Switzerland from an entrepreneurship perspective? What do you think is the main difference between Switzerland as an ecosystem, Silicon Valley as an ecosystem, Israel as what are some of the differences that make Switzerland maybe not a startup nation yet?
Mm-hmm. One big difference I see is that somehow the Swiss startups, either they don't seek to or they're not able to attract really seasoned, successful business people who understand their industry inside and out to the management team. This is so critical. If I look at the companies that were invested in Israel, or in North America. I'm not saying that the initial inventor wasn't some young PhD student, but the team is investable because they understand the ecosystem, they understand the dynamics within that industry, they understand which business models will work, which ones won't, what the challenges will be, what the pricing models can be, and very importantly, they know who might be early adopters of that technology. And I too often find in Switzerland a very, very young team, which is fun. I mean, it is exciting and stuff, but they're lacking some really critical knowledge that is important in order for them to be successful, right? And then therefore they are not backable from our point of view, right? So they don't even have a realistic understanding about how much money they're going to need to raise, right? So they may come to me and say, oh, we're going to build XYZ and we need 5 million. And I say, well, how much do you need till you actually break even? Oh, 5 million. I say, times 10, so that's important. That's important that these founder teams can attract, but you also need the other side. You need the seasoned executives who are willing to join startups. And so I think that there's two sides to that coin, right? I'm contacted much more often by senior, VP type people in major corporations who tell me, I want to join a startup. Non-Swiss, right? They want to join a startup. Do I know any? Do I have any portfolio companies which are looking for somebody in their senior team? And yeah, that doesn't happen too often in Switzerland. I think that as the success stories become better known in Switzerland, and maybe the society needs to embrace this kind of risk-taking character a little bit. Not saying that each individual needs to do it themselves, but the social acceptability or even appreciation of such individuals, when that rises, today it's still, I think, if you tell people, oh, I'm an engineer, okay, maybe a little bit less so than in the past, but there was a phase in Switzerland where, oh, you had to be a banker and then you were somebody, then you had to be an engineer and then you're somebody, right? But I think this, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I run a 10-person company. Typically in Switzerland, I'll think, oh, he must have lost his job somewhere, right? So I think that when that happens, when maybe the media can play also a very important role. I know that these incubators and accelerators that we have now in Switzerland, I know that they're doing a great job is trying to bring in these more seasoned people to come in and at least give advice to, but maybe, maybe that leads to them actually joining those founder teams. So I think that's the biggest difference. And if I look back over the years of all those companies, Swiss companies that we've looked at, if they had had one or two such seasoned people, it would have made it a lot more investable.
Now this is really interesting because it's that two-sided sword, because it's like, yeah, on the one side it's the startups, on the one, startups saying, okay, we want to go bigger than Switzerland, maybe we want to go really big. Also the big thinking thing, which is in Switzerland. I'm Swiss, I can say this, right? We have the tendency to think really small and go like, let's just take one step at a time. Maybe it's not the biggest thing ever. Let's keep it calm, not tell anyone about it, and things like that. Because people may judge us, right? They go like, yes, okay, so what's this guy doing, starting his own company? He must have lost his job, right? Stuff like that. It's such an ingrained thing in culture, in society. And that's already going through a huge shift, but I don't know how long it's going to take. All I think we can do is to help accelerate that. And on the other side, the seasoned executives, exactly. I mean, I have the same experience. Very often I get contacted as well from people like that. Realize like I'd love to join, but then in Switzerland you also have this comfort level. It's like, even if you work at a big corporation and you earn 250, 500 grand a year, and it's all good, and it's usually a pretty comfortable job. It's stressful, yes, and stuff, but there's not a lot of risk and everything. And then even if you lose your job, you get 2 years of a really nice package. And there's so many layers of nets that it's so comfortable that if there's not enough inner drive from the get-go, it's just like there's no other way for me to become an entrepreneur, because I simply am an entrepreneur. If that's not there, but that needs to be discovered, it very often doesn't get there because it's too comfortable to just, stay the ground and say, well, maybe one day. And it's really interesting there. So what do you think? I mean, do you think it's really a cultural thing that is so different about Switzerland than it is about the US and Israel and Lisbon and Vienna and, all these other countries? Or do you think it's something else? I don't know if it's about politics or anything else, or do you think that's really it?
I think, I've been pondering this question for a long time, many, many years. I really do think that's what, there's, even in the US, there's a reason why you see so many of these founders are immigrants, right? Even in Israel, right? It's basically a country of immigrants, right? It's people who don't have a whole lot to lose, who have to fight anyway to make something happen. So they don't start with that within the comfort zone, right? They need to work hard just to get into the comfort zone anyway. So I think that's, it's not only Switzerland, but I think you see, and even in Germany, I have to say, I mean, there's been a huge, huge improvement in the quality of entrepreneurs over the last almost 20 years, right? I would say when I started back in 2000, Switzerland and Germany, at least in our sector, they seemed quite similar as far as the lack of experienced entrepreneurs or experienced executives becoming entrepreneurs, whereas today it's quite different. And I think that has to do with the awareness of the success of some of these companies, where it becomes an attractive career path, if you'd like, and therefore, one that other people also give credit to and look up to, right? I think that Switzerland can go in that direction as well. I wouldn't see why it shouldn't. But the fact that, exactly as you said, people are already in their comfort zone. They're already living quite a nice life, if you like. And to a certain extent, they need to be ready to risk a bit of that. I mean, it's not like they're going to personally go bankrupt, right? But they need to risk a bit of that, right? Maybe the whole societal awareness of the positive side of being an entrepreneur. But people also have to be willing to let go of control. I mean, a lot of the Swiss startups, they would rather control something that's very, very tiny than have a 10% slice of something that's huge and international, right? So going back to your topic about, let's just keep it small. I think in the back of their minds, it's also, as long as it stays small and it stays Swiss, I can be the head of it, right? Wouldn't you rather be number two of something that is gigantic, right? I think there's this drive to build up something and then to IPO it or to sell it and then go on and do your next thing. We're a long way from that in Switzerland. That will take, hopefully I'll see little signs of it happening before I retire one day.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it's really interesting, your insights, because you've been in this market for a long time and you've seen many, many things, and you have the comparison to all the other markets that you're invested in. So it's very interesting to see your insights there. So last question, basically, if people want to connect with you, learn more about the portfolio companies, learn more about what Emerald is doing, what you guys are up to, what are some of the best places to go?
Send me an email. I am still, this is a little bit of a problem with this here. You have the generation, clashing with the digital revolution. I still come from the generation where we actually answer every email, or every correspondence that comes in, you answer it. So unfortunately, when I started that behavior, I didn't think I would be getting 200 to 300 emails a day. But yeah, I mean, people usually they will send us an email. I mean, obviously now, because not only do we have the venture capital side, but we also manage the Technologie Fonds for the Department of Energy and Department of Environment. And so we become much more visible. So my colleagues who are more involved in that, they attend a lot more of the Swiss events, also to bring up awareness to people that there is that program of debt guarantees coming from the Swiss government. So I think that, it's easy to find us. We're right here in Seefeld, right? And yeah, people just write us emails, and we don't need, I think it's also kind of funny because a lot of times entrepreneurs think that they need some kind of a special way to get an introduction. We treat everybody the same, whether you came in, with a fantastic introduction from somebody I've known for, my whole life, or whether you just sent me a cold email. We look at each case on its own merits. So yeah, people should just shoot me an email.
Love that. So I'm going to link to the source of the website so people can find, the email as well, and reach out to you. So once again, thank you so much, Gina, for the interview, sharing your wisdom and contributing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.